The phone buzzed in Marcus Reed's pocket at exactly 2:47 in the afternoon, and the number on the screen made his stomach drop. Eastside Daycare never called unless something was wrong. His supervisor barely looked up when Marcus grabbed his jacket, muttering something about his son running a fever, and by the time he reached the executive floor elevator, he was already calculating whether he could afford another urgent care visit this month. The hallway stretched ahead of him, all polished marble and recessed lighting, the kind of space where men like him were supposed to be invisible. He rounded the corner too fast and collided with a woman in a navy blazer, sending a cascade of folders across the floor. Several heads turned from nearby office doors. One middle manager paused mid-stride and let out a sound that was almost a laugh. "Wrong floor, buddy. Maintenance is downstairs." Marcus said nothing. He knelt and gathered the scattered papers, his hands steady despite the heat rising in his chest. And when he found a sealed envelope marked confidential among the debris, he stood and held it out to the woman. She reached into her purse and produced a $50 bill. Marcus looked at it for a long moment. "I don't need your money," he said quietly. "I need to get to my son." He placed the envelope in her hand and walked toward the elevator without looking back. Behind him, Evelyn Carter stood motionless in the hallway, watching him go. 3 days later, Marcus found himself back on that same floor, though this time he'd been summoned. The receptionist behind the curved mahogany desk asked him to repeat his name twice, her manicured fingers hovering over the keyboard like she expected him to disappear if she blinked. "Marcus Reed," he said again, keeping his voice flat and controlled. "I have an appointment with Miss Carter." The woman made a show of scrolling through her calendar before pressing a button on her headset. A security guard materialized from somewhere down the corridor, escorting Marcus through a maze of hallways that smelled like fresh flowers and old money. The office at the end was larger than his entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Manhattan skyline, and Evelyn Carter sat behind a desk that probably cost more than his car. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Sit down, Mr. Reed. I have a proposition for you." Marcus lowered himself into the leather chair across from her, noting how the soft material seemed designed to make visitors feel small. "If this is about the other day in the hallway, I already told you I don't want your money." Evelyn's expression didn't change. "This isn't about money, or rather, it's about much more than money." She slid a folder across the desk, and Marcus recognized the logo of a medical billing company on the first page. His medical billing company, his late payments, his collection notices, his son's specialist appointments, all laid out in neat columns and damning figures. "How did you get this?" The words came out harder than he intended. "I needed to understand who you are," Evelyn said simply, "before I made my offer." She stood and walked to the window, her back to him, silhouette framed against the city below. "My family's company has certain archaic provisions in its charter, provisions that were written 100 years ago by men who couldn't imagine a woman leading anything. To assume the position I've earned, I need to be married by my 35th birthday. That's in 11 months, Marcus waited. He'd learned a long time ago that silence was sometimes the only power available to a man like him in rooms like this one. Evelyn turned to face him. "I need you to pretend to be my husband for 1 year." The sound that came out of Marcus wasn't quite a laugh. It was something harder, more brittle, born of too many years watching people like her make decisions that affected people like him without a second thought. "You're serious?" "Completely. And you picked me because..." "What?" "You needed someone black, with no connections, no family with lawyers on retainer. Someone who'd be easy to control and easier to forget when this is over." The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Evelyn didn't flinch. "I considered several candidates, men from appropriate backgrounds, with appropriate pedigrees, men my family would have approved of without question." She paused. "And then I watched you in that hallway. Security offered you $50, and you handed back a document worth millions without even glancing at it. My assistant tried to give you cash for your trouble, and you looked at her like she'd insulted everything you stood for." Marcus said nothing. "I didn't choose you because you're easy to control, Mr. Reed. I chose you because you're the only person I've met in years who didn't try to sell themselves to me the moment they saw an opportunity." The folder sat between them like an accusation. Marcus thought about the stack of bills on his kitchen counter, the calls from the hospital's payment department that came like clockwork every Tuesday, the way his son Jalen had asked last week why they couldn't go to the zoo like other kids at his daycare. What exactly would this involve? Evelyn returned to her desk. Public appearances, formal events, the occasional photograph. You'd need to relocate to my building for the duration, though you'd have your own quarters. Complete privacy. Your son would have access to the best schools and healthcare in the city. She met his eyes. And at the end of the year, you walk away with enough money to never worry about collection calls again. Marcus picked up the folder and began to read. The lawyer's office was on the 42nd floor of a building that Marcus had walked past 100 times without ever imagining he'd set foot inside. The conference room windows looked out over the city like it was something to be owned rather than lived in. The contract itself ran to 73 pages. Non-disclosure agreements, behavioral clauses, media protocols that specified everything from acceptable interview responses to approved physical contact during public appearances. Marcus read every word while Evelyn sat motionless beside him, her face revealing nothing. "There's a morality clause," the lawyer said, adjusting his glasses. "Given the unconventional nature of this arrangement, the media scrutiny will be intense. Any deviation from the agreed-upon narrative could have significant legal and financial consequences." The unspoken words lingered in the air like a threat. "For you, not for her, never for her." Marcus turned to the section on public relations and found a paragraph that made him set down the document. "It says here that my personal history and background will be subject to enhanced review by your communications team." "What does that mean, exactly?" "It means," Evelyn said carefully, "that my family's company has never had a person of color in a prominent public-facing role. The board will be watching, the press will be watching. Every word you say, every move you make will be analyzed through a lens that neither of us designed but both of us have to navigate." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, letting the weight of her words settle into his bones. "I have one condition," he said finally. "My son stays out of this. No cameras, no photo opportunities, no candid family moments for your PR team to exploit. He's not a prop." Evelyn nodded without hesitation. "Done." The pen felt heavy in Marcus's hand as he signed his name at the bottom of each page, wondering if he was selling something he'd never be able to buy back. "There's a reception next week," Evelyn said as they stood to leave. "My brother James is hosting it. Consider it your introduction to the family." She paused at the door, something almost like concern flickering across her composed face. "They won't make it easy for you." Marcus looked out the window at the city spread below them. All those lives moving through streets he knew and buildings he didn't. "Miss Carter, nothing about my life has ever been easy. I think I can handle your family." The reception was held in a penthouse that occupied an entire floor of a building overlooking Central Park. Marcus arrived in a suit that Evelyn's assistant had selected for him. The fabric finer than anything he'd ever owned. The fit so precise it felt like wearing someone else's skin. He recognized the look on the doorman's face when he walked in. That split-second calculation of whether he belonged or had gotten lost on his way to somewhere else. Inside, crystal chandeliers cast warm light over clusters of people who all seemed to know each other, who all seemed to belong in this world of champagne and small talk and casual displays of wealth. A waiter offered him a glass from a silver tray, and Marcus took it without intending to drink. He spotted Evelyn across the room, deep in conversation with a man who shared her sharp cheekbones and cool gray eyes. Her brother, James, the one whose ambitions had been thwarted by the family charter that demanded a married heir, As if sensing his gaze, Evelyn looked up and made her way toward him, moving through the crowd with the ease of someone who'd been navigating these waters her entire life. "Ready?" she asked quietly. "As I'll ever be." They walked together into the heart of the room. The private dining room at the back of the penthouse seated 12, though only 8 places were set. Marcus counted the faces as Evelyn guided him to his chair. Her brother James at the head of the table, radiating barely concealed hostility. 2 board members whose names he'd memorized from the briefing materials. A woman in her 60s who turned out to be Evelyn's Aunt Margaret, and 3 others whose connections to the family remained deliberately unclear. The soup course had barely been served when the questions began. "So, Marcus." James Carter swirled the wine in his glass, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. "Evelyn tells us you work in our mail processing center. Quite the Cinderella story you two have crafted." Marcus set down his spoon with deliberate calm. "I work in document services, actually. Though I imagine it all looks the same from up here." A board member named Harrison leaned forward, silver cufflinks catching the candlelight. "And your education? I don't believe I caught where you attended university." "I didn't," Marcus said evenly. "I went to trade school after high school, then started working. My son was born when I was 23, and night classes weren't really an option after that." The silence that followed was the kind Marcus had grown used to over the years. That brief pause, where people recalibrated their assumptions and decided how much less to think of him. Aunt Margaret smiled in a way that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Well, I think it's wonderful that Evelyn has always been so adventurous in her choices. She never did like doing what was expected of her." A ripple of polite laughter moved around the table like a wave. One of the unnamed guests, a man with gray temples and a Princeton class ring, cleared his throat. "I suppose the real question is whether our new family member understands the culture here. These dinners, the galas, the board functions. It's a particular world, and not everyone is equipped to navigate it." Marcus felt Evelyn stiffen beside him, but before she could speak, a young waiter appeared at his elbow. The man was new to the job, nervous, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for Marcus's water glass. "Excuse me, sir," he said in a hushed voice. "Mr. Carter's driver is waiting whenever you're ready to leave." The table went quiet. The waiter's face flushed deep red as he realized his mistake, his eyes darting between Marcus and the actual guests like a man watching his career end in real time. "I'm not the driver," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly across the room. "I'm the groom." But before anyone else could react, Evelyn rose from her seat. Her chair scraped against the hardwood floor with a sound that silenced the room completely. "Marcus is my husband," she said, and her voice had the edge of cut glass, sharp enough to draw blood. "He will be addressed with the same respect afforded to anyone at this table. If that's unclear to anyone present, I'd suggest finding a different dinner party to attend." She didn't sit back down until the waiter had apologized 3 times and retreated to the kitchen. The rest of the meal passed in strained silence, punctuated by small talk that nobody believed. When they finally escaped to the car, waiting at the curb, Marcus stared out the window at the city lights blurring past, processing what had just happened. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. "Stand up for me like that." Evelyn didn't look at him. "Yes, I did." The waiter wasn't trying to be cruel, he just saw what he expected to see. "I've been dealing with that my whole life." Evelyn finally turned to face him, something unreadable in her expression. "Does it ever get easier?" Marcus watched the streetlights slide across her face, illuminating and then hiding her features in an endless rhythm. "No," he said. "You just get better at deciding which battles are worth fighting." They didn't speak again until the car pulled up to her building, but something had shifted between them. Some wall lowered by a fraction of an inch. The storm knocked out power to half the city around 9 that evening. Marcus was in the guest quarters when the lights flickered and died, leaving him in darkness broken only by the amber glow of the skyline through the windows. He'd grown up with blackouts in neighborhoods where infrastructure was always the last priority, where the lights went out and stayed out while the rest of the city hummed along, so he found candles in the emergency kit without much trouble. He was lighting the third one when a knock came at his door. Evelyn stood in the hallway in sweatpants and a Yale t-shirt, looking more human than he'd ever seen her, stripped of the armor she wore in boardrooms and at dinner parties. "The backup generators handle essential systems," she said, "but apparently the executive suites aren't considered essential. Do you mind if I waited out here?" Marcus stepped aside to let her in. The candlelight softened the sharp lines of the apartment, casting dancing shadows across the walls that made the space feel almost intimate. They sat on opposite ends of the couch, the darkness between them a kind of permission to speak truths that daylight wouldn't allow. "Can I ask you something?" Evelyn said after a while. "You already know everything about me. Financial records, employment history, medical bills. Seems only fair." She was quiet for a moment, as if choosing her words with unusual care. "Your son's mother. What happened?" Marcus stared at the candle flame, watching the wax pool and drip like slow tears. "Denise, we met in high school, got married too young because she got pregnant, and both our families said it was the right thing to do. We had Jalen when we were barely more than kids ourselves." He paused, the old grief rising like a tide. "She died when he was 2. Car accident on the way home from her night shift at the hospital where she worked as a nurse's aide." He was quiet for a moment. "I was working late that night, trying to pick up extra hours at a warehouse job that paid by the load. She called me around midnight to say she was tired, asked if I could pick up Jalen from her mother's place so she could go straight home and rest." His voice caught like it always did at this part of the story. "I told her I couldn't leave, that we needed the money, that she should just push through for another 20 minutes. He met Evelyn's eyes in the flickering light. She fell asleep at the wheel 3 blocks from our apartment. The silence that followed was heavy but not uncomfortable. Evelyn didn't offer empty condolences or try to fill the space with words. She simply sat with him in the darkness, and somehow that was enough. "When Jalen gets sick," Marcus continued, "taking him to the doctor at night is always an adventure. Last year he had an ear infection, fever of 103. I carried him into the emergency room at 2 in the morning, and the security guard followed us from the parking lot to the registration desk, asked me 3 times if the child was mine, wanted to see identification, suggested maybe he should call someone to verify my story." Evelyn drew her knees up to her chest, looking younger than her 34 years. "I was the second choice," she said quietly, "for everything. My brother was the heir, the one my parents groomed for leadership from the day he was born. I was the backup plan, the spare, the one they educated just in case something went wrong with the first investment." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "When James turned out to be more interested in spending the family money than growing it, suddenly I was supposed to step up. But the rules were never designed for someone like me." Marcus turned to look at her. "Someone like you? A woman, unmarried. Someone who built her career on competence rather than connections, who had to work twice as hard to be taken half as seriously." She shook her head slowly. "My own mother told me I'd never be taken seriously until I had a husband to legitimize my position. Can you imagine? In this century, in this country. And the worst part is, she was right." The candles flickered as wind rattled the windows, the storm outside still raging against the glass. "Do you hate me?" Evelyn asked suddenly. "For putting you in this position? For using you to solve a problem I should have found another way to fix?" Marcus considered the question seriously, giving it the weight it deserved. "No," he said finally. "I don't hate you. I'm too tired to hate anyone anymore. I've spent my whole life proving I deserve to exist in spaces that were never meant for me. Proving I'm not a threat when I walk down the street at night. Proving I'm a good father even when I can't afford to take my kid to the zoo. Proving I belong in a job interview, at a parent-teacher conference, in a hospital waiting room with my own sick child in my arms." He met her eyes in the candlelight. I don't hate you. I just want to stop having to prove anything to anyone." Evelyn was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Evelyn. My name is Evelyn." The lights came back on an hour later, harsh and bright after the intimacy of the darkness. But something had changed between them, something that neither of them could name yet. The park near Evelyn's building had a playground that Jalen loved, with climbing structures shaped like castles and swings that went high enough to see over the iron fence. Marcus brought him there on Saturday mornings while Evelyn caught up on work, their routine settling into something that almost felt like normal life. It was on one of those Saturdays that Evelyn appeared unexpectedly, still in her running clothes, her hair pulled back in a ponytail that made her look less like a corporate executive and more like someone's neighbor. Jalen spotted her before Marcus did. "That's the lady from TV," the 5-year-old said, tugging at his father's sleeve. "The one who lives in the big building." Marcus watched Evelyn approach, noting the hesitation in her stride, the uncertainty that looked foreign on her usually composed face. "Hi," she said, crouching down to Jalen's level. "You must be the famous Jalen I've heard so much about." Jalen regarded her with the frank assessment that only children can manage. "Are you my dad's boss?" "Something like that." "Do you tell him what to do all the time?" Marcus coughed to cover a laugh. "Sometimes," Evelyn admitted, "but your dad is pretty good at doing things his own way." Jalen nodded, apparently satisfied with this answer. Then his expression grew serious, the way children's faces do when they're about to ask something they've been thinking about for a long time. "The people on TV don't like my daddy, do they?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Marcus felt something tighten in his chest, that familiar blend of anger and sorrow that came with watching his son navigate a world that had already decided what to think of him. Evelyn glanced at Marcus, then back at the boy. "Some people are scared of things they don't understand," she said carefully. "It doesn't mean anything is wrong with your daddy. It means something is wrong with them." Jalen seemed to consider this with the gravity of a philosopher weighing a difficult theorem. "Okay," he said finally, and ran off toward the swings as if the conversation had never happened. Marcus watched him go, then turned to Evelyn. "The news coverage has been rough." "I know. My communications team wants you to skip the foundation gala next week. They think it will be better optics if I attend alone." Marcus felt the words like a punch to the chest, even though he'd been expecting something like this sooner or later. "Better optics. That's a nice way of putting it. I told them no." She said it simply, without fanfare, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. A woman on a nearby bench gathered her children and moved to a different section of the playground, casting a look over her shoulder that Marcus had seen 1,000 times before. Evelyn noticed. Her face went still. "Does that happen often?" "Every day," Marcus said. "Sometimes more than once." They stood together in silence, watching Jalen pump his legs on the swing, reaching for a sky that didn't care what color he was. "I had a meeting with the board yesterday," Evelyn said quietly. "One of the members pulled me aside afterward. He said I was making a mistake, that my choice of husband was becoming a liability." She turned to face Marcus, her eyes steady. "I told him that if my husband was a liability, then so was I, and he could take that information to the next board meeting if he wanted." Marcus studied her face, looking for the calculation, the angle. He found only exhaustion and something that might have been defiance. "Why?" he asked. "Why fight for this?" "For me?" Evelyn watched a cloud pass over the sun, momentarily darkening the playground. "Because the system that wants to push you out is the same system that tried to keep me down, and I'm tired of pretending otherwise." The summons came through official channels. A meeting request from James Carter's executive assistant, private location, no agenda provided. Marcus knew what it was the moment he saw the invitation. Some conversations didn't need agendas. James's private office was in a converted townhouse on the Upper East Side that had been in the Carter family for 4 generations. The man himself waited behind a desk of dark wood, a glass of something amber resting by his elbow. "Mr. Reed, thank you for coming. Did I have a choice?" James smiled, but his eyes remained flat and cold as winter. "We always have choices." "That's rather the point of this conversation." He gestured to a leather chair that probably cost more than Marcus's monthly rent. "I want to tell you a story about another man who married into this family. My Aunt Margaret's first husband. A lovely man, by all accounts. Came from a good family, went to the right schools, said all the right things at all the right parties. He swirled the liquid in his glass thoughtfully. He also had gambling debts that he'd hidden from everyone. When those debts caught up to him, he tried to leverage his connection to our family to make them disappear. It didn't end well for him." Marcus said nothing. "The point," James continued, "is that this family protects itself. We have to. We have enemies who would love nothing more than to see us fall. And when someone new enters our orbit, we need to be certain of their loyalty. I'm not your aunt's husband. No, you're something much more complicated." James stood and walked to the window, his silhouette dark against the afternoon light. "Let me be direct. My sister is making a mistake. This marriage, this arrangement, whatever you want to call it, exposes us to risks we can't afford." Marcus felt the familiar tension in his shoulders, the awareness that this was not a conversation between equals. "Is that a threat?" "It's an observation." James turned to face him. "You have a son, a beautiful boy, from what I understand. He's doing well in that new school, making friends, settling in. It would be a shame if circumstances forced him to return to his old life." The words landed like stones in still water, their meaning rippling outward into implications Marcus didn't want to examine too closely. Marcus stood slowly, his hands at his sides. "Say what you mean. What I mean is that this family has resources you can't imagine. We can make problems appear or disappear depending on what serves our interests. Right now, your presence is creating problems." James reached into his desk drawer and withdrew an envelope. "Inside you'll find a number. A generous one. Enough to set you and your son up comfortably for years. All you have to do is step back, quietly. Tell Evelyn you've had a change of heart. No drama, no press, no complications." Marcus looked at the envelope but didn't touch it. "And if I don't?" James's smile didn't waver. "Then we'll have to explore other options, less pleasant ones, for everyone involved." The drive back to Evelyn's building was the longest of Marcus's life. He sat in the back of the car, watching the city slide past, and thought about his son asleep in the guest quarters, dreaming of playgrounds and swings that reached the sky. He thought about Denise, working those extra shifts so they could afford a better neighborhood, a safer life for the child they were raising together. He thought about all the times he'd been told, in ways spoken and unspoken, that he didn't belong, that he should step aside, that he should make room for people who deserved to be there more than he did. By the time the car pulled into the underground garage, Marcus had made his decision. In his room, he opened his laptop and pulled up the draft email he'd started days ago, the one that would end this arrangement and return him to the life he'd known before. His finger hovered over the send button. Then he walked to the door of his son's room and stood in the doorway, watching Jalen's chest rise and fall in the moonlight. The boy had his mother's eyelashes, long and curved, casting shadows on his cheeks. Marcus thought about what it would mean to run, to take the money and disappear, to protect his son by removing him from a world that had never wanted either of them. And then he thought about what it would mean to stay, to stand his ground, to show his son that there were some battles worth fighting, even when the odds were impossible. He closed his laptop and picked up his phone. "Evelyn, I need to see you. Now." She met him in the hallway, still dressed in the suit she'd worn to her board meeting, her face shadowed with exhaustion. "What happened?" "Your brother happened." He told her everything. The townhouse, the envelope, the implied threats about Jalen's school, the options left unspoken but clearly understood. Evelyn's expression didn't change as she listened, but her hands, clasped in her lap, went white at the knuckles. "I'm staying," Marcus said when he'd finished, "not because of the contract or the money or any of the things that brought us together. I'm staying because your brother doesn't get to decide who belongs in this world and who doesn't. I'm staying because my son deserves to see his father stand up instead of step aside." He met her eyes in the dim hallway light. "I'm staying because I choose to, and that's the only reason that matters." Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was steady but soft. "Then we fight together." It wasn't a question. The boardroom on the 47th floor was designed to intimidate. 12 leather chairs surrounded a table of black granite, and the floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the city that reminded everyone present exactly who owned this particular piece of the sky. Marcus had never been in this room before. He'd never been invited. The emergency board meeting had been called by James Carter, ostensibly to discuss concerns about the company's public image. The real agenda was something else entirely. Evelyn sat at the head of the table, her face composed but her shoulders tight beneath her blazer. Marcus was seated beside her, aware of every eye that tracked his movements, every whisper that died when he glanced in its direction. "Let's not waste time," James said, his voice carrying the easy authority of someone who'd never doubted his right to speak. "We've all seen the press coverage. We've all seen the questions being raised about my sister's judgment." He slid a folder across the table. "And now we have this." The documents inside were copies of the marriage contract. Every clause, every condition, every carefully worded provision laid bare for the board to examine. The agreement was legal, Evelyn said evenly. It violated no company policies. Legal isn't the same as appropriate. A board member named Morrison leaned forward. "This arrangement makes us look like we're hiding something. And in this business, perception is reality." Another board member, a woman named Chen, turned to Marcus. "Mr. Reed, help us understand. What exactly is your interest in this situation?" Marcus felt the weight of every gaze in the room. "My interest is in fulfilling the terms of an agreement I made in good faith. An agreement that included considerable financial compensation." "Yes, for pretending to be something you're not," James smiled thinly. "See, that's where this gets complicated. Because the question isn't really about the contract, is it? It's about whether someone of your background is the right person to be associated with this company, with this family." The silence in the room was absolute. Marcus stood. The movement was slow, deliberate, the kind of motion that said he was done sitting while others decided his fate. "I'd like to make a statement," he said. "If the board will permit it." Morrison waved a hand. "By all means." Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew his phone. 3 days ago, I received a visit from James Carter at his private residence. He offered me a substantial sum of money to dissolve my marriage to Evelyn and disappear quietly. When I declined, he implied that my son's safety and well-being might become complicated if I didn't cooperate. He tapped the screen and placed the phone in the center of the table. James's voice filled the room, tinny but unmistakable, outlining the same threats he'd made in the townhouse. The board members exchanged glances. Morrison's expression shifted from skepticism to something closer to alarm. "This is outrageous," James said, his composure cracking for the first time. "This is a private conversation that was recorded without my consent." "New York is a one-party consent state," Evelyn said quietly. "You might want to consult with legal on that." Marcus looked around the table, meeting the eyes of each board member in turn. "I grew up in a neighborhood where nobody who looked like me ever sat at tables like this one. I went to schools where the expectation was that I'd end up in prison or dead before I turned 30. I've been followed in stores, questioned by police for walking through the wrong neighborhood, had security called on me for trying to eat lunch in a park with my own son." He paused. "None of that has anything to do with my qualifications, my integrity, or my value as a human being. but it has everything to do with how I've been treated since I walked into this building." He gestured toward the recording, still playing softly on his phone. "The question you need to ask yourselves isn't whether I belong here. It's why someone who threatens a child to protect his position was ever given the authority to speak for this company in the first place." Board member Chen leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "Mr. Reed makes a fair point. The optics of this situation are problematic, but perhaps not in the way we initially assumed." Morrison nodded slowly. "We've had situations before where family members with significant stock positions have married people from outside our usual circles. I don't recall this level of scrutiny being applied to any of them." "Those were different situations," James said, but his voice had lost its edge. "Were they?" Evelyn spoke for the first time in several minutes. "Or were they just situations where the spouse in question looked more like what this board expected to see?" The vote, when it came, was not unanimous, but it was decisive. James Carter was removed from the executive committee, pending a full review of his conduct. Evelyn retained her position, and Marcus, for the first time since this arrangement had begun, felt like he'd been seen for who he actually was rather than what people assumed him to be. The days after the board meeting passed in a blur of press conferences and legal consultations. Evelyn navigated the fallout with the same composure she brought to everything, while Marcus found himself retreating to the quieter corners of their shared life. The contract stipulated that the marriage would end within a specified period following any challenge to its legitimacy. With James's threats now a matter of public record and the board satisfied that no impropriety had occurred, the clock on their arrangement had begun to run out. They met in the underground garage on a Thursday evening, both of them dressed in the clothes they wore when no one was watching. "The lawyers want to finalize the separation agreement by the end of the month," Evelyn said without preamble. "I've instructed them to ensure that all financial provisions are honored, regardless of how the contract technically concluded." Marcus nodded. "That's generous of you. It's what we agreed to." She paused. "I owe you an apology. For what? For putting you in this position. For asking you to be something you never signed up for. For assuming that because I needed something, I had the right to ask you to provide it." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "You gave me a choice. That's more than most people in your position would have done." Evelyn shook her head. "I gave you a choice between poverty and performance." The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across her face. She looked tired, not just physically, but in the deeper way that came from carrying burdens no one else could see. "I want you to know something," Marcus said. "These past months, watching you stand up in that boardroom, listening to you fight for things you believed in even when it cost you, that meant something to me." Evelyn's expression flickered with something he couldn't quite read. "Marcus, I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I know how this works. I know what we agreed to. But I spent my whole life being told that people like me don't belong in rooms like yours. And then I watched you make space for me anyway. Not because of what I could do for you, but because you decided that I mattered." He took a breath. "I don't need you to save me. I don't need anyone to save me. But I needed to be seen. And you did that. So, thank you." Evelyn was silent for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with something that might have been tears. "I spent my whole life trying to prove that I deserved to be in those rooms too, that I wasn't just the backup plan, the substitute, the woman who got the job because her brother was too corrupt to keep it." She met his eyes. "And then I watched you walk into a boardroom full of people who'd spent their entire careers looking down on people like you, and you told them the truth without flinching, without apologizing, without asking permission." She shook her head slowly. "I thought I was doing you a favor by giving you a seat at the table. Turns out you were the one teaching me how to actually use it." They stood there in the fluorescent lit silence of the garage, two people who'd found something unexpected in each other. Something neither of them had been looking for. "The contract's over," Marcus said finally. "Whatever happens next is up to us." "Yes," Evelyn agreed. "It is." They walked out of the garage together, into a night that held no promises and made no demands. The weeks that followed were quiet ones. Marcus moved back to his old apartment, though it seemed smaller now, the walls closer together than he remembered. Jalen asked about the big building with the nice playground, and Marcus told him that sometimes people lived in different places during different parts of their lives. The boy accepted this with the easy flexibility of childhood and went back to his Legos. The text message came on a Sunday afternoon while Marcus was making lunch. Just 3 words. "Can we talk?" They met at a coffee shop in Marcus's neighborhood, a small place with mismatched chairs and a barista who called everyone Hun. Evelyn looked different here, away from the corporate armor and the expectation of performance. She was wearing jeans and a sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders, and she was holding her cup like she wasn't quite sure what to do with her hands. "Thank you for meeting me," she said. Marcus sat down across from her. "Your message didn't leave much room for decline. I wasn't sure you'd want to see me, after everything." "After everything," he repeated. "You mean after your brother tried to bribe me, your board tried to interrogate me, and half the city spent months debating whether I was a gold digger or a victim?" A small smile crossed her face. "Something like that." Marcus shrugged. "I've had worse weeks." The barista brought him his coffee, and for a moment they sat in comfortable silence, watching the Sunday afternoon traffic pass by the window. "I've been thinking," Evelyn said finally, "about what you said in the garage, about being seen." Marcus waited. "My whole life, I've been performing. First for my parents, then for the board, then for the press. I learned how to be what people expected me to be so well that I forgot there was anything else underneath." She wrapped her hands around her cup. "And then, you came along, and you refused to perform. You just were who you were, even when it cost you. Even when it would have been easier to play the part. I don't know how to be anyone other than who I am," Marcus said. "It's not a virtue. It's just a fact." "Maybe." She looked at him across the table, "But it taught me something I'd forgotten, that there's a difference between playing a role and actually being present, between performing connection and actually having it." Marcus studied her face, looking for the angle, the calculation he'd grown used to seeing in the world she came from. He found only uncertainty and something that might have been hope. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want to know if we can start over," Evelyn said. "Not the contract, not the arrangement, just this. 2 people sitting in a coffee shop, trying to figure out if they want to see each other again." Marcus thought about all the reasons to say no, the difference in their worlds, the complications that would inevitably follow, the questions people would ask and the assumptions they would make. Then he thought about his son asking why the people on TV didn't like his daddy, about Evelyn standing up in that dining room, refusing to let a stranger's mistake go uncorrected, about a night without power, when 2 people had told each other the truth in the darkness. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Anything." "That first day in the hallway, when I handed back your envelope and refused the money, what were you thinking?" Evelyn considered the question. "I was thinking that I'd never met anyone who looked at me like they didn't want something, like I was just a person who dropped her papers, not an opportunity or a problem to solve." She paused. "I was thinking that whoever you were real. And I'd spent so long surrounded by people who weren't, that I'd forgotten what real looked like." Marcus nodded slowly. "My son likes the playground near your building. He asks about it sometimes. There are other playgrounds in the city." "There are." He took a sip of his coffee. "But he had a point about that one. The swings go higher than most." Evelyn's smile was slow, careful, like she was afraid of wanting something too much. "Is that a yes?" Marcus looked at her across the table. This woman who'd upended his life and challenged everything he thought he knew about the world she came from. "It's a maybe. A strong maybe. With conditions. Name them. No contracts. No arrangements. No pretending to be something we're not." "And?" Marcus leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to match the quiet intimacy of the moment. And if this is real, if we're actually going to try this, then we do it as equals, not as the corporate executive and the guy from document services, just as two people who are tired of being judged by everyone else's expectations. Evelyn extended her hand across the table, not for a handshake exactly, but not quite for anything else either. "Deal," she said. Marcus looked at her hand, then at her face, then back at her hand. He thought about walls and bridges and all the spaces in between. He thought about his son learning to reach for things that seemed impossible. And then, very slowly, he reached back.